Welcome into the Husker247 HoopsCast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson. We are back after a 1 week hiatus. My apologies, listeners. I was kind of unavailable for much of last week due to unforeseen circumstances. So we were never able to record a podcast, which is probably good. I don't know that we had 20 minutes, Brian, in us to talk about that Nebraska-Michigan State game. That was, if we were going to miss a week and not recap something, that seems like a good game to not recap. Instead, we're going to be able to focus almost exclusively on Nebraska's win against Indiana that occurred on Friday night. The Huskers took down the Hoosiers for the fourth straight time, I believe. Did it 3 times last calendar year or last, basketball calendar year, and then gets the win on Friday. Brian, just throwing all sorts of things out there. Give me your thoughts in order. 1, us missing the show. 2, a 10-second recap of Nebraska-Michigan State. And then 3, your thoughts on Nebraska-Indiana.
Us missing the show last week was fine. It would have just had to have been like whoopee cushion sounds like for 10 minutes.
Straight fart noises for 20 minutes.
Yeah. 89-52 was the score.
Yuck.
That we can move it quickly along because my thought after that game in East Lansing was sometimes you don't want to just say a loss is a loss, but I thought, well, you'd rather lose by 37 and come back and win Indiana and beat Indiana and be 1-1 than lose 2 games by 3 points, right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
There's your trade-off. So take the good part of that with Nebraska coming back strong. It was striking, I guess, and this connects also to the Indiana game, how, Fred Hoiberg kind of called him out for like 2 practices going into the game at Michigan State, just weren't up to the standard he thought, and he was a little worried about that. And it sounds like, what we know that he challenged Bryce Williams and Jawan Gary in particular, like, you got to set the tone this week going into Indiana and people are going to follow you. And that's sort of what happened. And then it helps, of course, when Bryce Williams is just like incredible and 10 of 15 from the field and hitting fadeaway shots well covered. He just, Nebraska hit tough shots on Friday night. It wasn't just like they were all wide open or anything to get to 61%. That's what stood out, is guys had a high degree of difficulty while completing some of these buckets.
Is there something about Indiana right now that just brings the best out of Nebraska's shooting? Because they have, in the last 4 games, have won by double digits each time. Ran Indiana out of the gym up in Minneapolis last year in the Big Ten tournament. But, in all of these games, Brian, there's like that kind of portion where, it's a little back and forth. And then Nebraska just pulls away. And in almost all of these games, save for that one in the Big Ten tournament where Nebraska shot out of a cannon and Casey just had a monumental day, and that was that. In the rest of these, Nebraska just kind of pulls away late. And there's something about this matchup where it seems like Hoiberg kind of he's able to get what he wants offensively when Nebraska's played Indiana.
Yeah, he is. I wrote it in a story. If you go through and look at their point totals, it's like all like mid 80s and up, in these wins. So yeah, they're getting what they want. And then they've just shot well against Indiana too. Like they've had guys who've been lights out. It feels like in each of those games, if you went through, like, you could find one player who was just above average or way above average. I mean, just almost spectacular. And that was Bryce Williams this time. But it wasn't just him. I mean, like, I thought Andrew Morgan, like, he was taken out of the first half with foul trouble, only played like 3 minutes. And then he plays 15 minutes in the second half and ends up with 10 points and only missed 1 shot. And he's really got some crafty moves when he gets that ball in the post that I've kind of enjoyed watching. And then Connor Essegian had the bad game at Michigan State, only got 2 shots, 1 point. And he gets going again with 13. And I thought hit one of the toughest shots of the game. It was 68-67. And then this is when Nebraska said goodbye. And Essegian had a driving shot, tough, was pretty well guarded. He was falling to the floor. He hits it. That makes it 70-67. Next possession, Andrew Morgan gets an offensive rebound, feeds Bryce Williams, who scores 72-67. Then the 3-pointers, and they're off. So they had that little string of like 2 minutes of basketball there where they just did all the little things right to make sure this was going to be their night.
Yeah, Andrew Morgan had probably the best game in East Lansing too. I mean, he played pretty well in that game, and then he turned around and he played well against Indiana. You like to see that. You like to see kind of the front court success against Big Ten teams. You like to see him grabbing offensive rebounds and working down low. He's, would like to see him finish at a little bit higher percentage, that close to the rim sometimes. But I feel like he's actually kind of played his best basketball in the last 5-6 games of what we've seen from him. And so that could be a good sign for Nebraska moving forward. You mentioned Bryce Williams just sort of going off. I was a little surprised how quiet he was in East Lansing, how they were able to kind of get him out of the game. And, they just played an aggressive man defense. And I wondered if that's going to be an issue for Nebraska. And then Bryce turns around against Indiana, and different defense, different strategy and everything. But he proves that, again, he can be a really good player in this league. And so, I think kind of he's going to have to put the team on his back every now and then. And when they kind of have games or slow starts to the second half, like they do against Michigan State, or they did against Michigan State, that's where you kind of need Bryce Williams to step in and reassert himself kind of going forward. I mean, you don't have rink master Casey to do that. It's kind of Bryce and Juwan Gary, and we'll see what Andrew Morgan and Connor Essegian are able to provide as well.
You know what else this game reminded me a little of was the Creighton game, in the sense that there's this talk going in. Hoiberg's getting asked about it a few days before the game about like a big man like Ballo for Indiana, like, how you deal with that. And I don't want to put him in the same line as Kalkbrenner, but there was the same deal where you're talking about a big that has had some good production, and they really, not to the same effect as they did against Kalkbrenner, but they just took away Indiana's bigs. Like, I mean, they really made it a thing. Like, we know that this has been a weakness for the Hoosiers, shooting the ball from behind the arc. They've tried to sort of fix that. But Indiana shot 35 times from three. And I think Nebraska's like, if you make them, we'll give it to you.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been a proven formula for Indiana basketball under Mike Woodson, and so they end up 8 of 35. Indiana does. They had some good looks too, like late, where they kept getting offensive rebounds and they couldn't cash it in.
Right.
But I think Nebraska did a nice job again with their defensive strategy. Is like, okay, you're not going to have both things. We're going to take away your bigs and some of the mid-range stuff. And Nebraska actually ends up winning in the paint 36-24 in this game, and ends up hitting as many 3-pointers as Indiana, even though Indiana took 35 shots and Nebraska took 14. They both hit 8. So there you go. Nebraska, I just thought, again, followed a plan pretty well. And they didn't get out of that even when Indiana started probably, a little hotter than the Huskers hoped. Indiana was 5 of 8 from 3 before they just went off the ledge and they couldn't hit anything.
This game was a blowout win for Nebraska. It could have been an even bigger blowout win, except the Huskers struggled in 3 areas that I know Fred Hoiberg emphasizes. What of these 3 things do you think annoyed him the most from Friday's game? The missed free throws, the turnovers, or the offensive rebounds allowed? What do you think, Brian?
I think
because all 3 of those numbers are kind of
yeah,
shockingly bad. Like,
they
Nebraska missed 9 free throws, I believe. They had double-digit turnovers. It was more than 15, or I think it was right around 15. And then they allowed 15, 16 offensive rebounds as well.
Yeah, they lost offensive rebounds 15-6. What Indiana, of course, couldn't hit those shots I mentioned. And so the second chance points ended up being only 10-8 Indiana. So Nebraska got away with it in a way. And then the turnovers, Nebraska had 14, Indiana had 9. But if you look at points off turnovers, 14-14. So Indiana, even the stats Indiana won, they actually didn't win, like, in the full picture of,
Mm-hmm.
like, the game, and so but you're right, like, there's things within there that Nebraska can really harp on from this film and be like, "You got away with that this time," where, like, Luke Good doesn't hit the three-pointer, in the corner after they get the second and third chance, but that might not happen, next time out, so I think it's sort of one of those useful tapes. To which one annoyed him the most? I would maybe say turnovers. I think he thought they they upped their physicality level much more than they had in East Lansing, and that's correct. And Bryce Williams said he thought even though the offensive boards were what they were, that Nebraska actually maybe got a couple bad bounces and stuff like that. Like, he was pretty happy with their effort there. I think the turnovers, some of the unforced stuff probably had to be most grating. There was like 2 or 3 possessions like in the first half where Nebraska just gave it away. And Indiana went on a run. Reminded me a little of St. Mary's, where you have
Mm-hmm.
these little windows where it kind of comes in droves, like 3 or 4 possessions for this team where they'll just give it away without even getting a shot, and then the other team has a 6-0 run or something.
Yeah, I think there was a 6 possession stretch where they had 4 turnovers when they were leading something like 13-4 early in the game, and then they just weren't able to add to their lead because they weren't actually getting shots off. And so, yeah, it makes me wonder because they've brought in ball handlers. They have a more traditional point guard setup, and yet you still see moments where Barricade's bringing the ball down and maybe handling it a little bit too much. You don't want to see Braxton Mia probably handling the ball 35 feet from the hoop, trying to make a handoff. Some of the dumb turnovers there. Hopefully, they can find a way to avoid going forward. Brian, set the scene a little bit before we shut this thing down. What does the rest of non-conference look like for Nebraska? Because there's not that many games left before we're just only in conference play.
Yeah, well, now it's off to Hawaii with the next game on December 22nd against Murray State. Let's look at the bracket a second. That they play again on Christmas Eve after that, and let's see, they play Hawaii or I can't think of who's on the other side of it right now. Hawaii or Charlotte. So actually, that'd be who they get the second game, depending on wins and losses, of course. So it's a tournament where if you look at the field of 8, Nebraska's the best team talent wise, but Schaefer, how difficult some of those holiday tournaments can be, like 3 games in 4 days. It's kind of a weird setup where you have like this 9 or 10-day break, and then it's boom, boom, boom. And so
Mm-hmm.
you've really got to be dialed in a place where it's easy to probably not be dialed in, when they hand you a lay at the airport or whatever. And so that's going to be the test, is like to understand, like, you really got to go get 3 in this. I mean, it's not like it's the end of the world if you go 2-1, but it is a tournament that I think can hurt a lot more than it can help, if that makes sense. Like, I just don't think Nebraska can get a ton out of it unless they just go 3-0 and sort of dominate everybody. But that's easier said than done over the court. Someone's going to test them at some point out there.
Yeah, well, and it'd be kind of cool if we get the Bryce Williams versus Charlotte game on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, that would.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
If we could pick something out there.
And one more thing about Bryce. Obviously, what he did he was the Big Ten Player of the Week, 30 points, 6 boards, 5 assists. They didn't make as big a deal about it in the post game, and Bryce didn't either. But Miles Rice, I think, is really good for Indiana. He's just slick. I mean, and he sort of got going against Aaron Eulis there in a stretch where he had 13 points in a row in 3 minutes, and he was really the sole reason Indiana was in the thing. It went from 58-49 to 62-62, and Bryce guarded him at times, but I didn't notice it as much until after that flurry that he had. Bryce Williams was guarding him, and he did a nice job of sort of like, all right, we're settling this down. And I don't think Bryce always gets enough credit for what he can do on that end when he's dialed in on a guy and like really determined to take him out of it. And I'm not acting like he just took. Miles Rice scored 20 points. He was really good. But Bryce Williams for like 3 or 4 key minutes, I thought kind of negated that. And that's when Nebraska went on the run. So I just thought he did everything really well in that game.
Yeah, he's long. Like he's got the long arms. It's also sneaky in that he blocks more shots than you think. Usually trailing on a loose ball or on a fast break coming through behind a guy. But yeah, he's got the long wingspan. He can definitely play some solid defense. And Nebraska's a better team defensively than I think they probably will get credit for either, because you don't necessarily think of Fred Hoiberg in defense. But the last couple of years, when they've been at their best, it's when they've really kind of choked down some teams and made them play different styles of basketball. I got one last big picture question here for you before we guess a random Husker Hooper. Do you think that we give Fred Hoiberg enough credit for the coaching job that he's done over these last few years? I mean, where things started the first couple seasons here at Nebraska to where it is now. And then how, there's really no chance for an off night in the Big Ten for basketball. Like you've got good coaches and good teams every time out for the most part. And I think Hoiberg has really kind of held his own and proven to be pretty solid here, which we thought coming in. And then you had such a disruptive, ugly start to his Nebraska tenure.
Don't you think a big part where you got to give credit is he came back into the college game, and I feel like he was sort of attacking, like they're kind of attacking the transfer portal, sort of like they had like at Iowa State, where they were ahead of the curve in how they did it. But it had changed where everybody was sort of competing for the same guys, and it was like they hadn't quite found their footing on who they wanted to locate or maybe how to redirect as college basketball had shifted. And I think where you really give a person credit is when things are going really bad and they just stop it and be like, all right, we got to readjust here. And we're going to make some big decisions. He did with the staff and, and I think he's got some really good assistants around him right now. And Nate Lenzer and Ziegler and Howard. And I think he really trusts them, and they've all got their niche that they really excel in. And they just work well as a team, and they've sort of figured it out. I think going back to 2 years ago, the type of player and how they can fit together in this era of college basketball, and also the value, even if a guy didn't play like power conference basketball for most of his career, like Andrew Morgan has been on the floor for a lot of games. And there's something to be said for that. Like every guy out there, when it was 64-64, had played like 3 or 4 years of college basketball, and that makes you feel good. Like Raleigh Wooster is just so experienced. Like maybe it had a turnover that was sloppy, but he's been through it all, and so he's gonna get back and not just become a head case about it because he had a bad possession. And so I think he's really done well at identifying experienced players who can make you the most veteran squad on the floor, even against some of these Big Ten teams that have had, maybe they do have some upperclassmen, but I don't think they've had Nebraska's had more upperclassmen than a lot of the teams in the league the last 2 years. And I just think it matters.
Yeah. I just want to stop and give him credit for kind of what we've seen here. I think he coaches a good brand of basketball. I like his play design in terms of some stuff that they run. That a really nifty thing. I don't know if you remember the exact possession. I can't remember who had the pass. I think it was Bryce Williams. But it was set up where you would assume that it's Juwan Gary setting the screen for Connor Essegian, except they swerved it a little bit, and it's Connor Essegian stepping right into his spot so that when Bryce Williams hits the pass to Juwan Gary, Essegian's naturally there for a pick to set open kind of a wide open three. Gary knocks it down, making it look even better than it is. But he subverts some of your expectations. I mean, they do some really nice stuff in terms of movement away from the ball and constantly having cutters and filling areas where defenses are maybe vacating because they're rolling over to help with other stuff. I've noticed a lot more of it now, and it seems like it's more noticeable when you have the right pieces and guys are making shots. But there's a lot going on in what he has built out for them on offense. So, you know, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, you just think guys are either standing around or they need to do more, but they have some nice set pieces and some different things that they do.
Yeah, and it's a reason why a guy like Essegian wanted to come here. I mean, a guy who really knows ball like him, sees how that offense works and is understanding of, like, I mean, he watched it as an opponent, like, okay, he does a really good job. He's going to free me, not just for shots behind the arc, but he's going to give me opportunities to move within the offense and show off my mid-range game, get to the basket. Like I mentioned, that basket that made it 70-67, like stuff like that. I think guys really, it's appealing to them when, I think they do a good job when it's portal season of when the guys come in, like they can show them a particular player they had the year before. And it's like, look at what he's doing here in this particular set. This is you know, like, or maybe we'll branch off of this a bit, but they get that across to the guys. And then you got to give them credit for Bryce Williams. I mean, coming out of Charlotte was on a roll at the end, like in the CBI tournament there, but it wasn't like everybody in the country was talking about Bryce. And even before this season, Schaefer, I was looking at like people doing their preseason stuff, and Bryce had a great finish to last year. And I thought, man, he's going to be one of the best players in this league. And you just wouldn't see him like on people's top 15 or top 20. And there was a lot of, this team's got to go prove it. Don't get me wrong. But there was a lot of people, I think, who were so caught up, like from the outside looking in at like Casey and all that. And they're like, oh, they're what, Nebraska's back to whatever. And it's like, you're kind of missing the boat here. Cause Bryce Williams is like, is a dog. And you got a guy in Jawan Gary that I don't think people are paying attention to sometimes on the outside. And so then they suddenly go against Nebraska. It's like, okay, those guys are really good. Bryce Williams is the best guy on the floor. And he was on Friday. Indiana had 3 or 4 really top-notch blue chippers, and Bryce Williams was the best guy on the floor.
Yeah. And the other thing is they're big, they're long. Like, I think they're deceptive in that way. Like, you're taking on Nebraska and you're just expecting you're going to be able to get these shots off or to score, and they can really alter, you know, what you want to do. Braxton Mia, again, you know, talking about Hoiberg with design. Now you have teams chasing on the 3-point line or chasing stuff. They're able to just drop it in for easy dunk baskets for Braxton Mia. Like, they're doing a nice job utilizing and getting full value out of their roster, and it's good to see. I think they're going to have another competitive and fun team down the stretch in February, which is what you want for Nebraska basketball.
Can't you see too that like bigs, like they have to love like the offense where they get to handle the ball and distribute and stuff like that. And I know they show the guys, like even Mia does that. He steps out and they run stuff through him, and he, you know, and so it gets them away from we're going to stick you down in the paint. I mean, those guys are very almost like the point guard on some possessions, and that has to like fire up guys. And I think it's going to continue to help Nebraska as they recruit through the portal going forward with those type of like 6'9", 6'10" guys, your Burke's and stuff like that.
No question at all. All right, let's dive into everyone's favorite portion of the show, where we guess a random Husker hooper. I believe BC was up last time with Wesley Smith. And so now I have the Husker. We're going to the wheelhouse. We're going to a player that played from 1992 through 1996 across 4 seasons. This is a known Nebraska player, someone that Brian has watched in his career, someone that Brian probably has seen post his basketball career because he's around. Do you have any immediate guesses just off of the years given?
92 to 96.
Yep.
I was gonna say like a Strickland, but that you wouldn't do that. That'd be too.
Or would I?
No, I'm not gonna make that my guess. Maybe it's him, but how about Terrence Badgett?
That's correct. You got it. Didn't even have to go with any other clues.
Well, that was just like a game of like, that was a mental game, and my mental capacities usually suffer, but I was thinking like, it's not going to be Strick because he's just like too out there in our minds. And I think I've talked about Jerron Boone too much. But we can talk about Terrence Badgett. Do you have some thoughts?
I don't, because I don't remember these teams. I mean,
Omaha South.
95, 96 is NIT team, right? I'm pretty sure that's the NIT team. Like those are like my earliest Nebraska basketball memories. I missed everything largely before that. And then right around the NIT runs and Tyronn Lue and Vincent Hamilton, that's when a young Mike Schaefer sort of emerges as a Husker basketball hoop head. But it wasn't really much before that. And then on top of it, even the rest of the 90s there, it's a little fleeting. It's like the early 2000s when I'm just completely start locking in on Nebraska basketball. And then basically by the time I'm a sophomore in high school, like that's probably the sport that I knew or put more attention into between that and football at that time too, which is wild.
I don't think it's any secret to anybody who listens to these that I loved like 1990 to 98 Nebraska basketball and the Big 8 more than like anything in sports. So I do remember those rosters really well. I remember the like your early game on, but it was even before it was Studio 66, but you'd have like your Nebraska would often be in like the 12:30, 12:45 game, and then Colorado, because it was like the West Coast team, because it was Mountain Time Zone, would be like the 3:00 game, and they'd have like Donnie Boyce and guys like that as their guard. But Badgett, out of Omaha South, I'm pretty sure he led him to the state championship game his senior year, and it was a really fun South team. And I think they lost to Millard South. And maybe they won. I could be wrong. I'm sorry if I shortchanged him there, but he got him to the finals, and it was like a big story when I was growing up in Omaha. And so I always liked Badgett. And then he had a game. It's on YouTube. Go watch it today, Schaefer, where Nebraska beats Kansas. Dick Vitale is on courtside. It was a huge deal at the time to have Vitale in Lincoln, and Nebraska finishes the game with a Terrence Badgett. Like he gets a steal and he crams it like in the final seconds as people are rushing the floor. And Vitale's
see
shouting,
the video,
yeah, he's shouting about how he's like a diaper dandy and all this stuff. And that's probably the highlight. He had a lot of good games as a Husker, but that's the one you have to say comes to mind because it's one of the great moments in Husker basketball history, honestly, to have Vitale screaming as fans are rushing the court. So that's what comes to mind with Terrence.
He won a Class A championship in 1990.
They did win
Packers. Yeah, so that was his junior year. His senior year, he earned Gatorade Nebraska Player of the Year.
I do remember, though, they had that South team, and it was kind of unheard of that South would do anything in hoops at that time, and he led them there, and it was really cool. That was such a golden era, too, in high school basketball. You had Andre Woolridge coming up at Benson, and just so many gifted players, and Badgett was definitely one of those 3 or 4 names that everybody was talking about.
He was just shy of 1,000 points in his Nebraska career. He played in 127 games. Started kind of a handful of them. He started more early in his career, and then he kind of came off the bench later. Spent 5 seasons professionally trying to play basketball in the United States, and then Taiwan, Ireland, Germany, and the Philippines.
I didn't know what he did after that, but yeah.
He was really involved in the Boys and Girls Club up in Omaha when he came back to Omaha in the 2000s. So,
yeah, and the dunk he had against Kansas, that was an era where Nebraska was just a pain in the butt to KU whenever they came to Lincoln. It's not like they won every year, but they were winning the majority. And KU would always come in second or third, and Nebraska would sort of pull something special and just play over their heads and beat them. At one year, they ran them out of the gym, but it was always magical when Kansas came to Lincoln because you kind of expected Nebraska was just going to take it to they're going to look like a Final Four team for an evening.
Yeah, we have very different views of the Nebraska-Kansas because for me, it was always, by the time I got into it, Nebraska wasn't winning games in that series. When they did win, it was like a shocking, euphoric type thing. And I have so many memories of watching somebody like Brandon Rush just nail 3 after 3 in the Devaney and just completely take the crowd out of it. But I also have the memories of the Kerry Cohorn game. I mean, I regard that like it was a Sunday afternoon on CBS, Kerry Cohorn versus the entirety of the Kansas team, where they have, Miles and Langford and all of these guys. And he is playing unbelievable. And I still can't believe Nebraska didn't win that game. Like that one, looking back on it, like that one hurts as much as any loss to Kansas that I can remember.
Wasn't that the same day as the USA Canada gold medal hockey game where like Sid Crosby scored? Because I remember I decided.
No, I don't think so, because that would have been 2002.
Okay.
I want to say the United States Crosby one would have been like late to
Okay. There was
2010-ish.
There was some year where I didn't go to Nebraska, Kansas because I wanted to watch both that and the hockey game at the same time. And I'm not like a puckhead or anything, but I was like really into it for some reason. I used to get really in.
I think Olympic hockey is a blast. I love the Winter Olympics. I like Olympic hockey. The year that I remember that being a big deal, I was still at the Daily Nebraskan. Everybody's crammed into the sports section watching United States Canada in this hockey matchup, and I want to say Crosby had the winner.
Yeah,
he had the heart-ripping one. I want to say that was 2010.
Yeah, that might have been it. It was because Crosby wouldn't have been there in 2002. But whatever I'm thinking of, there was some clash of hockey and hoops on the given day, and I remember the game you're talking about. Well, Nebraska played well. I also remember the one you will as well, where Kansas was up like 47-6, like on Big Monday.
I stood and got in line at like 12:30 after classes that day for an 8 p.m. tip over in Devaney. Doc came by and handed out some pizza. It was like me and like 25-9, and then it kept growing and growing and growing, and Nebraska lost by 1,000,000 points that night. That was rough. The last time these teams got together in Lincoln, when James Palmer has the go-ahead layup, and you can hear on the audio feed of the I was at the game, but I went back and watched it, and he tells the Kansas guy, "You can't stop me," and he flexes at him after he makes it. Oh, it was amazing. It was incredible. And then, of course, wing three-pointer, and Kansas walks out victorious. But that was I would love to see Kansas come back into this building. I always enjoy that matchup.
Yeah, they should do that. I guess we do have far different memories, because there was a run where the Huskers had their number in the 90s, and that included Terrence Badgett.
Naturally, I just was not aware enough of college basketball at that point to be locked in on it, unfortunately. And instead, I have to cling to, I think they won in 2004. Nebraska beat them up pretty good at home. They won in 2009. Those are the ones that stand out for me with Nebraska.
That's all right. We're doing a podcast now about Husker This could be, you have to see it in the moment. This could be the golden age. Who's to say? Like they made the tournament last year. Let's see if they can get there again. And I know people would be snarky about that, but if whichever team cashes in first in March is going to be the team that people are going to remember for a long time. That's what hurt them so much last year when they lost in Memphis, because I know those guys wanted that so bad. But Fred Hoiberg has been very steadfast, we're going to routinely get there. So we'll see. But maybe we're doing a podcast during the great era of Husker hoops.
Is there a team, obviously there's no Kansas, but is there a team that you get excited about being on the schedule coming into Lincoln for basketball? I mean, again, it's a different era. It's the sport is different. But is there someone in the Big Ten that you look forward to when they play at Nebraska, just because the atmosphere is going to be good? Nebraska is going to be able to at least get up for that game, that kind of thing.
I feel like Purdue's kind of become that.
I think the same thing. And obviously you have the big win against them, but I feel like Nebraska has played Purdue hard in Lincoln a lot, during their time in the Big Ten. They had the snowstorm game where, people weren't really able to get there, but they upset that Purdue team. They had the game where they took them into overtime, where I think they were the number 1 or number 2 team in the country, the year before they ended up upsetting them. So they played Purdue really well. That came to mind. And then Illinois. I mean, there's obviously a different feel when Iowa comes to Nebraska for any sport. Wisconsin, similar vein, but I would say Purdue is probably the closest to the kind of Kansas thing.
Yeah, right now I would say so. And there was the game, I mean, before last year, 2 years ago, the bad call.
Yeah,
that
was the one that went to overtime.
And I have nothing against Matt Painter, but he's just enough of like a edgy guy. Like you can tell him in the Husker student section, there's a little back and forth there sometimes. He didn't like when Nebraska rushed the court and kind of made it known the post game. And I'm not picking a fight. I'm fine with Matt Painter. I'm just saying he's got enough of what you need from the opposing head coach to add to that idea. For a while, I might have said actually Indiana, only because I'm old enough that like it's still like, oh, the candy striped pants on the court like during warmups and all that. But they got to find it again, just like Husker football does. It's sort of like they've been walking in no man's land for a while. That I don't have the same feels I did even like 5 years ago, maybe.
Those parallels between Indiana basketball and Nebraska football are just getting stronger by the moment, it seems.
Yeah. They might be okay. I'm not ready to bury them. I mean, everybody in the league like lost on the road almost, it seems like, the first 2 games. So, they lost. Nebraska did what they're supposed to do, protect, serve at home. But it'll be interesting what Indiana comes up with. I still kind of think they're on the outside looking in as a tourney team, unless they work out some things, especially defensively.
Yeah, well, it'll be a lot of fun to get into all of this. I would imagine the next basketball podcast won't be until after the holidays, with the schedule, with everything in the middle of next week. So we'll get to Nebraska basketball coverage when we get the chance. Of course, they have the games coming up in Hawaii this weekend, so be sure to check out everything we have going on with that coverage at Husker247. Brian, anything you want to finish with?
No, we went long just because we weren't going to be back for a while, so we had to work overtime a bit.
Well, we got into some Nebraska Kansas talk and
nostalgia,
and some Terrence Badgett and all of it. So I certainly wasn't expecting a near 40-minute podcast, but we set a record today. I don't know that we went this long at any point last year, so I'd have to go back and look. But we got that going for us.
That's what nostalgia does.
That's what it does. All right. Be sure to check out everything going on at Husker 24/7. We'll catch you next time.